So thank you on behalf of the International Society for Quality of Life Studies for joining to this webinar titled Beyond Happy, How to Rethink Happiness and Find Fulfillment, presented by Mark Fabian. Is the 2025 ISQOLS Young Scholar Award recipient. So Mark, thank you very much for joining us. And now we would like to say that Mark is a reader in public policy at the University of Warwick and an affiliate fellow of the Bennett School for Public Policy at the University of Cambridge. He works on well-being from an interdisciplinary perspective with a focus on public policy issues. His work has appeared in top journals, including Perspectives on Psychological Science, the Journal of European Public Policy, Fiscal Studies, and Philosophical Psychology. And his A Theory of Subjective Well-being was published in 2022 by Oxford University Press in their Philosophy, Politics, and Economics series. He's an editor of the International Journal of Wellbeing and co-lead of the 2025 Wellbeing model of the European Social Survey. So, Mark, we are very excited to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much for having me. Yeah, this is a popular book. I hope it kind of shows off a lot of the academic work that I've done, but this is not going to be an academic seminar. We'll try to keep it more fun, and yeah, look forward to kind of the Q&A at the end. So I'll get into it. Hopefully my screen is working. Yeah, so this book, Beyond Happy, does draw a lot on my academic work, especially this book that Roger mentioned with Oxford University Press, A Theory of Subjective Wellbeing, but it's not a popular science book. It's got way too much kind of morality in there and way too many exhortations. So I make a lot of value judgments about what I think it means to live well, and I don't think that's really the place of science. This is more kind of me giving what I think is hopefully good advice, and I bring in a lot of stuff beyond science. So also, so obviously bringing in positive psychology and happiness economics and some of the things that ISQOLS is really known for, but then also a bunch of other stuff that I think is really important and maybe less scientific. So things like existential philosophy, but also folk wisdom, theology, perspectives from art, stuff like that. I hope that the book kind of really reflects this quote from Alex McCullers, who's one of the founders of ISQOLS and of the journal Social Indicators Research, that I think is what I try to bring to my own wellbeing research, that besides looking for models in machinery with discrete parts, wellbeing researchers should be looking at the arts of cooking, weaving, painting, music, and literature, where holistic thinking and orchestrated designs are known to produce qualities, including information not present in their distinct parts. So we have to take a holistic view of well-being, and actually the original title of the book was Wholeness, An Honest Guide to Wellbeing, but the publisher made me go for something more commercial. Speaking of commercial, what are my grievances with the other books out in the field, and why do I think this is different? So one of the main things is that I tried to bring loads and loads of stuff together. I think this book was written for me when I was 19 and I was depressed and I was looking for stuff on well-being and happiness, and I couldn't find the thing that I was looking for. And that's partially because everything was just one piece of the puzzle. And well-being is a very complex puzzle, so you need to assemble all of that. And I've tried to do that in one space. One of the main pieces that I think is usually missing from this literature is values, morality, and the role of nihilism. So how do we overcome the sense that there's no point to doing anything? That was definitely the issue I was facing as an 18-year-old, and it's a very big part of this book. I also try to avoid spreading, I guess, what I think is commercial propaganda. So claims like small changes lead to big transformations. I think that's basically bullshit. Wellbeing is quite hard. It's quite complex. It takes a while. So the book is very accessible. I think it's fun, but it's not necessarily being like, here's one quick hack and your whole life's going to change. That, I think, relates to what I would call the motivational speaker grift, which is to give people a positive buzz, a sense of nice feelings, and then they mistake that for a big change. We're not doing that here. We want the feelings, but we want people to actually go through the hard yards and make the change. I also don't indulge in this kind of confusion between self-optimization and self-actualization. So this isn't a book about hacking your way to happiness or anything like that. It's much more measured and substantive. And I also try, and I think this is one of the main contributions of the book, to describe well-being as something that we do together and something that's often very structurally determined, not just something that's entirely individualizing. And that's a problem that goes all the way back to the very first self-help book, Samuel Smiles's Self-Help, which was also extremely individualizing. And then finally, I want to make sure that everyone knows this. The book is not a blog post. There's a lot in here, as you'll see in this talk, where I'm going to brush over many of the things that I go into in a lot more detail in the book. Hopefully this is rich and it's worth your £15. All right. What is actually in the book then, after I've railed against other books? So there's 3 parts to it. The first is roughly how to live a pleasant life. Then we have how to live a fulfilling life, and then how to live a valuable life. Each of these is further broken down into 3 parts. In part 1, we have learning to love the hedonic treadmill. Then we talk a bit about the kind of character that you want to cultivate if you want to be well and be happy. And then we talk about moods and emotions. Moving on to the fulfilling life, it's really mostly about self-actualization. And then that leads into a discussion about inner harmony. Finally then, transitioning from the individual side of happiness to the collective side, we have this chapter on better together, which goes into much more of the social side. And then in the third part of valuable life, that's where I really get stuck into nihilism and provide an individual level solution to nihilism, which is in my academic work, and then discuss a sociological solution to nihilism, which is in metamodernity, which is this sort of emerging cultural mode after postmodernism that we're starting to see in a lot of really interesting popular culture and art. All right, let me go through each of those in a little bit of detail. So I think the hedonic treadmill, which I presume most of you are familiar with, is a great place to start any discussion of happiness and well-being, and any discussion of why the kind of default attitude of a lot of our culture is not helpful to well-being. So there is this presumption, I think, in a lot of public policy and a lot of young people that happiness and well-being is just over the next technological horizon or the next material horizon. If I just get promoted at work, if I just make a bit more money, if I just get a nicer car, then I will finally be happy. This might not necessarily be quite so material. It might be more of this grind set idea that if I can just get one step further along in terms of my success, then I will be happy. We are not wired for that kind of thing. We are wired to have homeostatically protected mood, which means that our positive moods tend to come back to baseline over time, and our negative moods also tend to recover to baseline over time, barring chronic stresses. And as a result of that, trying to just be happy is sort of a bit wrong-headed. You are just happy. We are generally disposed to have a mild positive background mood, because if we weren't generally positive in our life, we wouldn't do the work that's needed to survive the winter. We wouldn't put away nuts for the summer for the winter because we're too depressed, or because we're too ecstatic and we're partying all the time. Similarly, we have this kind of evolutionarily wired little itch to hustle, to just want things a little bit more. We can always see ways that things could be better. Right? And as a result of that, you will never kind of come to tranquility. You will never reach the end of the horizon and finally be happy. You just keep going. Now, I think there are a couple of responses to this. One, which I think is not helpful, is to lean into it. And this is what materialism really encourages us to do, I think, and also what a lot of corporate culture encourages you to do, is to always be hustling, always be in the grind set. That's just going to exacerbate the hedonic treadmill. It's going to speed it up. It's going to make it ever more unpleasant for you. Another option, one that I think we could all indulge in a bit, is to try to get off the treadmill, or at least to slow it down, to kind of temper it, make it more gentle, so it's not always going up a hill or something like that. And I think Buddhism has a lot to say about this, and also stoicism, and I talk about that a bit in the book, that we should try to manage our desires, try to always focus on what we have that's good, what we have that's positive. But I'm going to advocate for something quite different in the book, which is to make the treadmill a place you want to be. So this is a phenomenon that's going to be with you your whole life. You're always going to be feeling like there could be new things that you are doing and that your mood is generally coming back to baseline. So we need to work with that. So how do we create this life that gives us a lot of these mood kicks all the time, so we're generally feeling happy? And while we're not always looking for new things, we have a general idea of how we want to spend our time and our days so that we have this pleasant, fulfilling, and valuable experience of our life. Now, to start that, you've got to examine your life. So we've got to go all the way back to Socrates and think about the examined life. I think a simple question, particularly to ask young people, and I was 19 when I started thinking about this stuff. As I said, the book is written for that person predominantly, is, well, what do you want money and time for? So I think a lot of people, well, I need money. When I talk to my students at Warwick about what they want to do and why, they often say, oh, I just want to get rich. And the problem with that is that even if you achieve FIRE, financial independence, and you retire early, you still need to figure out what it is that you're going to do with yourself. Now you're young and rich, but you still don't know how to spend your money, how to spend your time. So why not start by figuring out what you want to do with your money and time, or rather what you just want to do with your time. And then you're going to do that. And you're going to get good at it because you're intrinsically motivated for it, you're interested in it, you're going to invest in it. And anything you get good at, you can eventually start charging a lot of money for. If you're really interested in food, eventually you'll become a really fancy chef. If you're really interested in woodwork, eventually you might be building sailboats. All of these things are things that you can make money on. So money is really something that you should think about after the fact. What you need to think about first is what your values are. All right. So once we figure out what our values are, then we can organize our life around that, not just our career. All right. Once we've kind of got that initial gist of things, or maybe we don't even have that initial idea of what we might want to do first, so we need to cultivate a particular kind of character that's capable of figuring out what it wants to do with its life and capable of living in a way that allows it to organize that good life for itself. Now, I think the key thing to underline here is that a lot of the character traits that are necessary for well-being are not the ones that are advocated for by our prevailing capitalist culture. Things like being a hustler, things like being ruthless, being commanding in the boardroom, all this kind of stuff can be beneficial if you're of a very particular disposition in your life. But I think for the most part, you'd be much better off cultivating some other qualities. For example, I think it's really good to have a scout mindset. That's from Julia Garlev. I think a simple way to come at the scout mindset is fallibilism. Always assume that you don't know all the things that you could know. Always assume that there are new things to discover out there. There are new perspectives to absorb from people. There are new things that you can learn. If you assume that you're ignorant, and you assume that the world is full of things to be curious about, then you will go out and explore. And in this way, you can discover things that ultimately turn out to be very valuable to you, things that you care about. You also need to try to work on your self-serving biases. Self-serving biases are often very protective of our well-being, so we can't be too quick to shred them, but generally speaking, they get in the way. I think they limit, in particular, our interpersonal relationships with people because they don't make us the kind of person that someone wants to hang out with. Crucial character trait, I think the most important character trait is integrity. And that means being able to act consistently with your values. If every time something new comes along or it's inconvenient to act in consistency with your values, you change your behavior, then you're never going to become the kind of person that you want to be. So integrity is crucial. Maybe related to that is to be generous. And I don't mean in a pushover sense, but to generally be a kind person, to generally be someone that builds a world around them, that tries to help other people, that tries to put their own house in order and help other people put their houses in order. And then you generally live in a world where people are doing better, rather than stepping on top of other people to get ahead, in which case you rule over a train wreck, which isn't a particularly nice thing for your well-being. I think it's then also crucial as a character trait to be honest, transparent, and accountable, and that makes you pleasant to be around. But there are further aspects of pleasantness to be around that I think are worth mentioning and that I talk about at more length in the book, things like being a low-stakes interactions person. So when people hang out with you, they shouldn't be terrified that you're about to blow up about something. If you have a short fuse, that's generally going to make people not want to hang out with you, certainly not want to spend a lot of time with you. And we want to cultivate these small qualities of our personality that encourage people. Slightly American way, where I'm always smiling. We don't want to be fake about it, but generally I want to be upbeat in my life. Now, I think crucial to this is Epicurus's insight, which I've got here. It is impossible to live a pleasant life without living wisely and well and justly, and that's part 2 and 3 of the book. But it's also impossible to live wisely and well and justly without living a pleasant life. So we want to be concerned with our pleasant life. Some of that is economics. We're going to have to take care of our basic needs. We're going to have food, shelter, heat, these kind of things, right? But what we need economically, materially, is very limited. I've got these pictures. They're not particularly expensive, but they do have some material aspects there. Then I go into a bit of detail on the hedonic adaptation prevention model. So these are a range of techniques developed by positive psychology, drawing on a lot of older literatures particularly stoicism, to help you manage your moods. So to prolong positive moods, to help you get into positive moods faster, to shorten your negative moods. I think the most important one here is gratitude, and gratitude gets a whole section in the book. It's much more deep than I think a lot of the positive psychology literature is able to make it, even if it wants to make it deep. Gratitude is a major feature of a lot of the world's religions. It's often embedded in a range of cultural practices, social technologies, everyday rituals that extend gratitude and make it permeate a lot of your life. We don't really get that in the positive psychology literature because it's too complex to pin all that down scientifically, but I go into some of that detail in the book. I also talk about stoicism, and then I end this section with quite a long discussion of mindfulness as a crucial skill for cultivating well-being. You need to be aware of your emotions as they're happening. You need to be able to introspect on those emotions and interrogate the information and messages that they're sending you. That brings us to how we self-actualize, part 2 of the book. I think an absolutely major theme of most of the early psychotherapeutic literature and also of the existentialism literature, but something that maybe we don't talk about quite enough in contemporary wellbeing studies. I built a little model of how to do self-actualization that I've published in various academic papers, and the book kind of sketches it out in a slightly more accessible way. It begins with self-discrepancy theory from Tori Higgins. Self-discrepancy theory argues that you have 3 kind of self-concepts that you're vaguely aware of. You have a sense of who you actually are right now. You have then a sense of who you would ideally like to be. That's a value that you have that you're trying to approach. And then you have a sense of who you feel a responsibility to be. So these kind of moral compulsions that you have to behave in particular ways, and we call that the ought self. Now, the really basic part of self-actualization is to try to harmonize your actual self with your ideal self, who you want to be, subject to the constraint of your ought self, who you feel a responsibility to be. So here I've got a very simple diagram of that, where we have a young woman who wants to be a judge. It's a very demanding career. It makes it very hard to dedicate much time to the household, but she's got her parents who are putting a lot of pressure on her to have babies. And, you know, deep down, maybe she also wants to have a child. She just doesn't know how to reconcile that with her ideal self. So you've got to figure out how to harmonize that. Now, one way of doing that is to find a house husband. There's a great book by Annabelle Crabb called The Wife Drought that's basically talking about how often we want to have these kind of transcendental careers, but we don't then have time for the reproductive work at home, the care work, all that sort of stuff. And that seems to traditionally have been a woman's role, but now we need to just make it a genderless role, but we still need that person, and we still need this culture shift to value all that kind of reproductive care work at home. In any case, that's a simple synthesis there. How do you navigate this harmonization process? Well, the key thing is these affective and emotional signals and your mindfulness and ability to introspect on those signals. If you have a discrepancy between who you are and who you would like to be, you're not living up to that ideal, it tends to lead to depression. And then you need to reflect on that depression and say, well, do I just need to try harder? Is this depression reflecting the fact that I really care about this? Or is this like actually a value that's coming from somebody else, or it just really doesn't suit me? I'm like 5'6" and I'm trying to be a professional basketball player. That's not going to work. In that case, you've got to disengage from that ideal self and develop a different one. If you have a discrepancy between your actual self and your ought self, then that's going to lead to anxiety and guilt. These are social emotions that communicate to us that our behavior is not something that we're comfortable with, but it's also not something that other people are likely to be comfortable with. And other people are crucial to our sense of relatedness, our sense of social support, and our well-being. So in reflecting on these discrepancies and the anxiety that they provoke, we need to try and glean the moral and social insights that we get from those emotional signals. Finally, on the positive side, if we have an alignment between our actual self and our ought self, then we get positive affective and emotional feedback, and that's a signal to us to double down. This is something that works for us, it suits us, we should invest more here, and we'll get more of that positive feedback. That's the first piece of the puzzle, self-discrepancy theory, affective signals, and then we add in self-determination theory, but particularly the affective signals from self-determination theory, which I think aren't talked about quite as much as they could be. Self-determination theory posits this motivational spectrum running from relatively intrinsically motivated things at one end, which are self-regulated. So you have to use a lot of willpower in order to make yourself do these things. And then at the other end, you have intrinsically motivated things that are relatively self-determined. So they arise from you very spontaneously and naturally. You don't have to use that willpower. Now, these motivational types, I think, are crucial to understand for well-being and especially for self-actualization. The intrinsically motivated stuff, when you're under duress, you're being forced to do it by somebody, this is going to be communicated to you in some kind of distress. If you're really unwell emotionally, probably there's some intrinsic motivation involved. At the other end of the spectrum, intrinsically motivated activities done for their own sake, inherently interesting, give us a sense of vitality, give us a sense of joy, excitement. These are the emotional cues that this is something that really suits you and is authentic. Unfortunately, some intrinsically motivated things might be bad. I might have an intrinsic motivation to eat a lot of chocolate, but then after I've gorged myself on those sweets, I feel bad about it. Changing these kind of intrinsically motivated things is extremely difficult, but sometimes necessary. Let's leave that to one side because it's a bit too complicated and focus on the middle types of motivation. So first we've got introjection. So this is where you're doing some activity, but not for the activity itself. That's not what you value. You value something that's contingent on the activity. So I think the easiest example is that a lot of us exercise not because we enjoy exercising, but because we want it for health. And health is something that we value. Now here, the emotional signals can be quite complicated. So for example, if you are engaged in something that's introjected in motivation, and when you do the thing and achieve the thing that you contingently value, all you feel is a sense of relief, then I think this is not sustainable. That's a pretty strong emotional cue that you've really probably internalized this from somebody else, and you don't care about the activity or really the thing that you contingently value. Neither of them are particularly important to you. This is probably a signal for you to disengage. On the other hand, if you get a sense of achievement, you're like, yeah, I went to the gym, I did that work this week, feel proud of myself, then that's a sign that even though this is introjected and it requires a lot of regulation and a lot of willpower, it's probably something that you're going to be able to stick with and that you should stick with for your well-being. Then you have identified motivation. This is where you value the activity itself, right? But you don't find it intrinsically interesting. It's not stimulating, it's not engrossing, you don't really do it. For me, this was maths. So I've always hated maths, but you need maths to do contemporary social science, which is something that I value a lot. And so when I first started doing maths, I was like, this is cool. I value this maths because I'm able to do a lot of interesting stuff with it, but it's always tedious for me. It's always a grind. I'm never really enjoying myself. Now, the key thing here is whether you get a sense of competence rising as you're doing this activity and whether there's a sense of a positive payoff. So you feel like that was worth doing, that was worth investing in. All right, and finally, you have integrated motivation. So this is where you have an identified behavior that gets linked to some intrinsically motivated behavior. So maybe we're just doing soccer for exercise. It might even be introjected, but we're doing it with close friends and we really like hanging out with them. That's intrinsically motivated for us. And that intrinsic motivation can rub off a bit on the introjected motivation and make it easier to sustain. So I hope here you can see this illustration that recognizing the emotional signals that you get, introspecting on them, digesting what information they're giving you, and then recalibrating your actual ideal or self on that basis is a really helpful way to stimulate this self-actualization process. Let me illustrate that for you in a graphic. So here we have, again, the young woman, her actual self, who wants to be an astronaut. That's her ideal self. Now, it doesn't need to be ambitious like this, right? I say frequently throughout the book, the best life for you is one that fits you, and it might not be ambitious at all. Maybe you just want to do a very simple job so that you have more time available in your life to invest in your kids, your relationships, your garden, whatever it might be. It doesn't need to be ambitious. This is just easier to illustrate with ambitious goals. So, young woman wants to be an astronaut. There is a discrepancy between who she is now and who she wants to be. So she's got to think about, how do I become the astronaut? What are the behaviors and values associated with being an astronaut? Well, there's two that I can think of. One is being good at science. The other is being jacked. All the astronauts that I've come across are super athletes, right? So maybe one of the first things you do is go and join a gymnastics club. Once you're there, you're going to get that affective and social feedback. You're going to be talking to the other people at the gymnastics club. You're going to be doing the exercises and seeing how you feel. Now, introspect on that, and all the signals might be really positive. You might really like that you're getting jacked. You like the body that's developing for you as you're doing the gym. Maybe you're making friendships, maybe even romantic partners. Maybe the exercise that you're doing helps you study more for your physics and chemistry classes. In any case, it's all positive. You just double down, invest more in gymnastics, invest more in athleticism. But it's possible that the affective and social feedback is more complicated than that. So it might be the case that you're not really enjoying anything here at all. In which case, you need a new behavior. So maybe you still like the science aspects of being an astronaut, but you don't like the athleticism aspects, right? And then from there, you get a new ideal self, which is to be a terrestrial scientist, and maybe you get sent samples by the astronauts. But it might be more complicated than this. It might be that you like exercise, you just don't like gymnastics, and then you want to go and join a different sort of sports group. It might be that actually gymnastics is great for you, it's just that the people in this club are wrong for you. Then you've got to join a different club. So always got to be introspecting, interrogating what we're learning in our process of self-actualization. How does this lead to well-being? Let me sketch a few things. The first one is you're generally going towards things that give you positive emotional feedback. So ultimately, you're going to end up, once you do this for a long time and you organize your life around it, with a preponderance of positive over negative affect. Because you're harmonizing with your ought self, you're becoming the person that you feel a responsibility to be, and you're also pursuing things that you personally think are valuable, you're going to develop virtue and you're going to have a sense of meaning in your life. Because you are doing what's authentic to you, things that arise generally through intrinsic motivation, things that you feel like are worth persisting with, you're going to develop a sense of autonomy, one of our basic psychological needs. Because we invest in the things that we enjoy, we're going to get good at them. So we're going to build our sense of competence. And because we're affiliating with like-minded people who support us, we're going to develop our sense of relatedness. We're also going to get, and I think this is a central claim of the book, but it's maybe a bit complicated, a generalized sense of flow. So flow is the feeling of being in the zone or lost in the moment. It's usually studied by looking at athletes or musicians during performances. But in Csikszentmihalyi's original formulation of flow, he had a much grander vision for it as something that could characterize your entire life, that you could be lost in your life, that your whole life would feel like the zone, which feels a bit to me like nirvana, just quite differently conceptualized than in Buddhism. Now, the key criteria for flow are high quality, instant feedback. Now, you have that in this case because you have cultivated your mindfulness. You're able to recognize emotional and social feedback. You're able to interrogate it effectively with your introspection. So you get that feedback. You have a balance between challenge and skill. So if things are overwhelmingly challenging, you roll it back because you're going to get negative feedback there, and that's going to encourage you to recalibrate. And because you're doing this calibration, you're gradually going to get that right balance between things that are stimulating, challenging, exciting, but not overwhelming. And finally, we're generally pursuing our intrinsic motivations. But note that this flow is not occurring just for one activity. It's occurring across all domains of our life. And this is the generalized flow that Csikszentmihalyi was talking about. And if I have a view of what subjective well-being is, it's this. All right. Very briefly, the chapter on inner harmony. So this kind of builds to the notion of flow, but it makes a broader point that we don't just want to be cultivating rationality and reason. To get well-being, we need to have a harmony between our reasons, which we unearth through this introspection, but also our intuitions, our emotion, our bodies, and our imagination. I think a key thing here is that it's your feelings that you need to live with, not your reasons, right? You can have all sorts of seemingly good reasons to do things. If the motivation's not there, for example, then you're just not going to be able to sustain that life. So we need to foreground our feelings and our instincts more so than our rationality. I might just leave it there for that one. We move then to one of the most important chapters in the book, I think, about well-being is something that we do together. Well-being is a social activity, well-being is structural. I've got here a picture of a community kitchen in the Basque Country where the corporation Mondragon, which is a big cooperative, creates a lot of these kind of social goods, and it has a lot of positive flow-on benefit. The chapter opens with a brief discussion of love, which I think is perhaps the most important thing for well-being and not something that we study a lot scientifically because it's so hard to study scientifically. And I think that really reflects poorly on what we prioritize in science, which is methods and certainty rather than the things that are most substantial and most effective. So I think we need to study love more. Something that we've studied in much more detail is social capital, public goods, collective action. I talk about all the benefits of these things for well-being in the book. And then I have a long discussion of care. Care is really fundamental to relatedness. It's not something that we necessarily teach people much in school. It's not something that we really talk about a whole lot, I think, in our culture, how to offer care well, how to have emotional intelligence, these kind of things, but they are crucial skills for our well-being and our happiness. And then I talk about karmic culture. And this is quite a long discussion. So I differentiate between mercenary culture, where we're just trying to get things that are to our benefit. I differentiate between reciprocal culture, where I help you because you will help me. I differentiate again through commercial culture, where you help me because I paid you to, which I think is quite disgusting, really, when we think about it in terms of care. It's very hard to give genuine care if you're only doing it because you're being paid for. That's why customer service is usually a bit ick. And then finally, you have karmic culture, which is where you help people and you're generous because you want to live in the kind of world where people are helpful and generous. You don't do it because you expect that person to help you. You do it because you want to cultivate a society where when you need help, someone will be around to offer it to you. And when people need help, you are there to help them. That's karmic culture, and that's something I think we've lost a bit and we really need to get back to. One way to do that is to become priests for each other. I don't mean this in the religious sense. If you take religion away from the priest as a social technology is an individual who is embedded in a community, who understands all the relationships in that community, and whose job is to be a shepherd for that community. And I think we can all do this in a secular way. We can notice the people around us, we can understand their needs, understand their hopes and dreams, and we can put into contact people who can be helpful to each other. There's a really great book by Cassie Thornton called The Hologram, which talks about this in detail and which I discuss a bit in the book. Finally, very briefly, just to say that I think we've gotten way too much to a culture that is about distinction as an ethos. I'm different to you, I'm better than you, I'm superior to you, I'm more successful than you. And I think that really undermines solidarity, the sense that to get a good life, we need to all do it together. We need to achieve that collective action. Solidarity is a value that we need to get back to. Coming into part 3, and I'm running out of time, so we'll get through this a bit quicker. So we have nihilism. So community that I've just been talking about in such positive terms is grounded in shared values. You can't have community unless we all care about the same stuff. Similarly, individual meaning in life is related to what we value. If you are troubled by nihilism, then you are unable to sustain this sense that things are valuable. And that really undermines these fundamental aspects of our well-being. What do I mean by nihilism? There's 3 components to it, or we can distinguish 3 components. One is nausea, the sense that existence is pointless. There's no kind of overarching goal to the universe. We're all just heading to solar heat death in the future. Anything we achieve in our lives will crumble to dust. Anguish, which is the sense that I don't really have an identity that determines what I'm going to do. Every time I have to make a decision, I am constructed. My identity is built by the choice that I make there. And that's very stressful. That's where my anguish comes from. And then finally, seriousness, which is this realization that if there's not morality written into the fabric of the universe, and I don't really know how that would work metaphysically, then morality seems capricious. I'm basically just making up my values as I go. How do we take our values seriously if they're just coming out of us? If we are the value creating agents, then how can we make those values serious? This comes back to the issue of integrity that I mentioned earlier. If we are afflicted by this nihilism, as I was at one point in my life, then it's also going to undermine our basic psychological needs. We're not going to be able to relate to people well because we don't think their values are particularly serious. We're not going to feel autonomous, and we're not going to invest in things because we don't care about them, and so our competence is going to struggle. It's very hard to overcome nihilism with hedonism. You can't just go partying all the time. Eventually your life will just feel empty. You're going to have to do something more significant about it. Now, a problem that we have today in contemporary society, and I'd say has been growing over the last 200 years, is that we are in what Viktor Frankl called an existential vacuum. We've slowly lost all the shared maps of meaning and value that we had as a culture over the last 300 years. Agrarian life was the first to go, and the village and the priest as an organizing unit. Then we lost unionized factory life. and the kind of social organization that brought. We've obviously lost religion over a very long period of time, including paganism and folklore and these kind of more local customs. We lost nationalism in World War I as a source of identity and cohesion. More recently, we've been losing gender roles and all other forms of tradition. And this means that we are in this big existential vacuum. Now, I think very scarily, the last time we had a big existential vacuum around about World War II, totalitarianism stepped into the breach. Totalitarianism is palpably, obviously about giving people a shared map of meaning. And that's what all this aggressive propaganda, all this aggressive symbolic logic of totalitarian regimes is about. After World War II, materialism filled the breach for a bit, especially in Europe, but now materialism's played out. Young people are excluded from the basic terms of materialism in terms of home ownership. Billionaires don't seem to be happy. We're sort of realizing that materialism ultimately leads to the same sort of depression as what we have even when we're not that rich. And crucially, sustainability and the issues of climate change and all the pollution that we're causing just mean that being ever more materialistic is not feasible. What can we do instead? Well, in the last 2 chapters of the book, I first proposed an individual level solution that worked for me. The first point to make is that moral reasoning is kind of a dead end. I've done colossal amounts of ethical philosophy. It hasn't really helped me especially much. What we evolved is moral feelings, not moral reasons. So you have to begin with making sense of your feelings. I think this is true even if you're a philosopher, even if you're a religious person. What ultimately matters is how you feel about yourself, whether you're comfortable with your feelings. So we need to start there, and that's about art. It's about interacting with other people in that relational, feelings-driven way, the qualitative way. And I think that this is very well explored in Hayao Miyazaki's The Boy and the Heron, but I'm running low on time, so I won't explore that. What we need instead is that self-actualization process that I described earlier, but directed at our morality. What are our ethical values? What kind of world do we want to create? What sort of change do we want to represent in that world? And then we need to act with integrity towards that vision of ourselves and that vision of the kind of world we want to be. And as we coincide with that ideal and ought self, we get the well-being that I talked about in that self-actualization process. And that means that there is a direct relationship between being a moral person, as you think morality is, and self-interest. And I think here there's this super powerful quote from Simone Weil, my favorite quote of all time: "Hope is knowing that the evil we carry within us is finite, and every turning towards the good destroys a little of it." And I think this is a key value for us in pursuing well-being, is mundane moral heroism. You don't need to solve peace in the Middle East or whatever. You just need to make your immediate world a little bit more moral as you perceive morality to be. All right, final idea in the book, big one, metamodernism. So how do we solve nihilism at the social level? Quick history tour. Post-World War II, we have high modernism. This idea that if we combine our new scientific insights like atomic reactions and humanistic values, we can create a better world. It's very idealistic. I really liked modernism in a lot of ways. I liked its sentiment, but it terminated in postmodernism, which is really characterized by much more cynicism and irony. But 3 key ideas, or at least I distinguished 3 key ideas in the book. One, from Lyotard, that meta-narratives are a grift. So things like nationalism, things like communism, these are all just myths that we tell ourselves. Truth and value claims from Foucault are often just power in disguise. And finally, from Derrida, the observation that most of the meanings and values that we share are intersubjectively constructed. They don't exist out there. Humans put them together for each other. Now, this leads us to the nihilistic swamp. That's what we're in right now. But contra Jordan Peterson and some other characters, I would say this was necessary. We had to get rid of all this old world fake news, fake myths type stuff. And now in the open space that we are left with, we can create something different, and that's metamodernism. But we have to go through the nihilism to get there. And I think it's very well represented in Everything Everywhere All at Once, the film that won a lot of Oscars, with this googly eyes metaphor. The black hole in the middle is the nihilism. You've got to surround it with the kindness, the empathy, the earnestness. Metamodernity is characterized by sentimentality, by earnestness and sincerity. You just put your values out there. This is something I care about. I'm going to be over here doing it. And if you care about it too, come over here and join me, and we're going to do it together, and we're going to create things that we love and value. It's not about saying that this is true, and if you're not doing it, I'm going to beat you up. It's about just doing your own thing and inviting people to come over there and celebrate it with you. We're producing art and value here, not scripture and material things. Kindness is really crucial because we are relying on our sentiment. We're just saying that this is what I value. It's so defenseless. Someone could easily say, lol, stop being a loser. But then they too would be unable to sustain any values. So we have to be kind to each other, except to people who are still trying to push these meta-narratives, still trying to be fascists. We need to keep that that postmodern cynicism and irony and detachment for those kind of people. Right. I won't worry about optimization culture. In the final parts of the book, I look at some examples of this meta-modern culture in B Corps, in effective altruism, which has a bad reputation, but I think the grassroots of effective altruism is full of super wonderful people who are extremely meta-modern. And then finally, I talk a bit about some new mythologies. All right, I will wrap there, and I will also spruik my dear friend Frank Martella's book, Stop Chasing Happiness, which is excellent, says a lot of the stuff I say, but differently, uses a lot of great anecdotes from Finland. And I will end with this quote from Simone de Beauvoir. Perhaps it is permissible to dream of a future when people will know no other use of their freedom than this free unfurling of itself. Constructive activity would be possible for all. Each one would be able to aim positively through their projects at their own future, which I think is a beautiful statement of what metamodernism is. Thanks very much. I can't hear you, Roger. I think you're muted.
Mark, I was saying that congratulations. It was very inspiring. I think that everyone enjoyed a lot. I think that we had so many questions for sure. So we will start. Please, you can turn your cameras on, and if you have any question, please raise your hand. We have the first one by Kelsey. So let's start. Thank you, Kelsey.
Yes. Hi, Mark.
I very much look forward to reading the book. Short response. I'm thinking about Goodhart's law, targeting anything. Maybe it reduces the meaning. So if we're looking just for hedonic feedback, and then I'm thinking about whether or not we should be doing introspection with some guidance, maybe with a mentor, a partner, somebody else that is trusted. And part of what I'm thinking, maybe instead of Goodhart's law, you can think of self-fulfilling prophecies. And, we could end up ultimately pushing us further down a negative cycle, perhaps. And related to this, do we need a certain amount of agency, competence, income in order to move along the direction in which you're advocating? Because, some of us may not have the opportunities to make some of the changes you're suggesting. But ultimately, very interesting stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelsey. Great questions. Let me make a few points. So I basically agree with everything that you're saying. I think on introspection, absolutely, the guidance stuff is so helpful. I think that's what parents are for a lot of the time. I think that's what priests used to do a lot of the time. Well, I think we can also bring a lot of this stuff back just through relationships. So if we know that this is what we are trying to do for each other, and this is something that we can ask our close friends for, like, hey, can I just hash this out with you for a bit? And I think that is something, particularly in male culture, that is changing. Like men's culture used to be very repressed and you couldn't talk about this stuff. It's starting to change a lot. But I'd like to see the revival of like women's circles, men's circles, just general like people's circles to talk about this sort of stuff, the cultivation of more community infrastructure where these dialogues can be had. I would like to see more widely available therapy, and not just cognitive behavioral therapy, but more this kind of talk therapy that's not even necessarily for things where you have like depression or something. It's just like, I can't work it out. I need to talk to someone who's seen some stuff. Completely agree on your point that we need some basic resources, including psychological resources and a level of education in order to do this stuff. And something that I advocate for generally in my policy work is that we should be preparing people for life, not just work in education. Education can take longer. We don't need to like rush it out as we currently do to make space for all this extra stuff that we want to do. And then we do need to make sure that the state is providing a lot of like basic security to people to think about this stuff I think UBI is a relevant part of that sort of thing, and we don't necessarily make it quite so contingent on paid employment, but rather being engaged in your life, doing the work to figure it out.
Thanks, Mark.
Mark, I have a question also. I am reading now the book of the philosopher Byung-Chul Han about the burnout society. I don't know if you have read it. That he basically also talks about the pleasant life, and that I think that he gives a message that is quite parallel to the one that or complementary to the one that you are that you are giving. That he basically says that we need more naps and more parties. So the way to achieve all this is also by de-stressing a bit more with our work life, that it seems that we are only focusing on being on maximizing our production and not about really enjoying life. So I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, a couple of things quickly jump to mind. So one is that I think the 4-day workweek studies, I find them pretty compelling, that when people are given that extra day, they do invest it in this kind of stuff that I've been talking about. So they do invest more in community organizations, they do invest more in reproductive and care work, this kind of stuff. So that does seem important to me, and a lot of that comes down to not just policy decisions around the 4-day workweek, but generally around industrial relations and labor laws, and trying to make people less precarious, trying to give people better bargaining power with their bosses, that sort of stuff. And then the other thing that I would mention is on naps. So there's a section in the book on drifting and like what to do when you can't quite figure it out. And one of my pieces of advice there is not to throw yourself into something that's very overwhelming. I think a lot of people graduating from uni especially get this advice to, well, just go work at like Goldman Sachs or whatever, and that'll prepare you well, like even if it's not ultimately what you want to do. But those jobs are very demanding. They don't leave any cognitive capacity for you to think about your life. So oftentimes when you don't know what you're doing, you should put more emphasis on napping, more emphasis on figuring it out, and not on making yourself really busy. Thanks.
Great, Mark. Kristen, do you have a question?
Sure, I'll ask a question. I didn't want to hog the question. So great to hear you hear your work and get to chat virtually. So I find a lot of this really compelling, and like I love the interdisciplinary approach, and so I find it compelling. I also know that the way as academics and as social scientists who study well-being, we talk about these things. It's very different from kind of the so-called real world, or, other cultures, other subcultures. And I know in my kind of hometown, family life, like most of what we talk about is not anything like this. It's just the daily, I don't know. I don't know. It's like literally what sports the kids are playing, or like so like how, in your own kind of context, because I know you're doing this with local organizations, like how do you translate this? Do you know what I mean? Like what's the man on the street kind of entry point into making this pitch for maybe metamodernism, like where you end it, or anything in between? Like how do you pitch this to people who, don't have the affinity for philosophy that many of us have?
I'd love to give a really long answer to this, but I'll just give like snippets, kind of the way I have for other people, because you asked about my co-production work. So maybe just drawing on that. I think it is difficult to stimulate people to think about these kind of questions. Hilary Cottam has 2 books. One's called The Radical Help, and the other's called The Work We Need. And she is a designer, and her expertise is in designing these kind of social technologies, I guess, or settings in which people can be stimulated to engage in this kind of imagination about what it is that makes their life go well and what would make it go better. There's a few questions that I've found really powerful to ask people. So to start with, I usually just ask people to reflect on a time in their life when they were really thriving and what characterized that time. So how were they feeling? Where were those feelings coming from? What was good about that time in their life? And then equally to think about a time when they really weren't thriving, and what characterized that time and why it was going badly. And then you have to engage in deliberation with people. So I think one of the big differences between how I approach this work now compared to when I wrote the OUP book is that when I wrote the OUP book, I thought, well, I'm an expert on well-being, I'll just go tell it to people. Whereas now my view is that our role in these citizen situations is to facilitate people to do their own investigations with each other. And so sometimes you can draw useful connections for people, like, well, the reason why you're really precarious is because of the way the welfare system is, or because of the way the industrial relations system is. That's something we can change politically. Other times you can sharpen their insights, you can organize them. So people will say all sorts of stuff to you in 2 hours, and then you take it away for a week, you organize it, you bring it back to them as a document, they read it, and then they're like, oh, this has really clarified a bunch of stuff for me, but here are new ideas that I have or things that I think you're missing. And I think we can do a lot of that sort of stuff alongside the academic work that we're doing now. And I think the obvious place to do that is just in community centers and churches and things like that. I hope
Great.
that helps. Thanks.
Chris, I think that you first turned your camera on. Yes.
Shanfei was the first to raise.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Chris. It's fine. Yeah, no worries.
Okay, well, I just want to first say I think it's fantastic that ISQOLS is hosting this topic, and Mark, that reflects the incredible breadth of your contributions. It's really awesome. I have two versions of this question, depending on kind of how much of some colored pill you've swallowed. And the first is, what do you imagine us doing with our time in 100 years to get that life scale flow? And the other is if you have a comment on the idea that we will actually give way to non-biological life in some sense near future, and some people are okay with that, maybe because of an argument of that it's inevitable, but that as we create superintelligence, we won't be useful and will disappear. And so I think, yeah, I think our field and work like yours has something to say about that, but I wonder if you've thought about it.
I actually have for a long time been thinking of writing a kind of fiction piece in which we have two technologies. The main one would be universal constructors, so the ability to convert energy into anything, at which point I think materialism just kind of completely runs out of usefulness. And then what would we do with our lives if we had that kind of technology? And the second one would be like meaningful automation of what Marx called alienated labor, which is like all the drudge work, basically. If we were free from that, then again, what would we do? And I think the most important technological breakthroughs that we've had are not the things that kind of facilitate more productivity, but rather the things that free us from drudge work, like the washing machine and the dishwasher. These are the two pieces of technology that I value the most. So I hope that in 100 years, we are absolutely still around. I find most of the kind of accelerationist stuff around AI pretty nauseating for the most part, and kind of overhyped, but we don't need to get into that too much. But even if there was some kind of AI running a lot of the drudge work for us, at the moment it seems to be running the art for us, which is bad, I think, for the most part. But I would like to see us in 100 years engaged in our lives. Some of us might be working in a gainful employment sense, but I think most of us would be doing other things. It might be investing in relationships, it might be producing art, it might be producing cultural practices. Like doing orchestral performances is great fun, super meaningful, inspiring stuff, even if you're not the best there ever has been or whatever. I would just like to see us more engaged in these kind of expressive activities and value generating activities rather than accruing more stuff. I think we have enough stuff. It made sense for a long time, but it doesn't make sense anymore.
Great.
Thanks. That was great.
Yes. Shanfei?
Oh, hi. Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Thanks for your presentation. Really interesting. But my question is, if we think as an individual person and go through self-management, self-understanding, and self-planning, and of course, I mean, it really takes a lot of experience and eventually can go to the stage you're trying, you talked about. But from a social attribute perspective, when we think myself, my life satisfaction, not only when I review myself, my past experience, but also I make a myself comparison with the others. And when the moment this is, sometimes I would think, okay, is that fair? Like the fairness and the unfairness, this kind of topic comes up. And then, so we can't really leave us ourselves away from the society, and then from there, so how do we at some point maybe measure the fairness? So from one individual person matched to the other in a society, or maybe we can deliver guidance sort of to help people understand where they actually, standing today, or given their life stage, to talk about this.
Yeah, thanks. It's an important question. The first thing I would say is there was one bullet point that I didn't get to in the talk, which is this statement from Goethe: you can treat people as they are or as they can be. And I think the way we are is generally to be making a lot of comparisons. But I don't think that this is something that we can't change about ourselves. Like, I think it's quite possible to reduce your tendency to make comparisons to other people. I do have a PhD student who's just started with me, whose whole PhD is looking at the human brain's tendency to interpret everything through comparison and whether that imposes constraints on these kind of things. So maybe I'll get back to you in 5 years once they're further along on the research, because I'm very interested in this. But I do find that it is possible to dampen your tendency to make comparisons and to focus more on yourself, and not even to focus on comparing yourself to where you were and where you're going to be or something like that, but to kind of fully get above this tendency to interpret everything relatively and to have a better sense for what things are, absolutely speaking, so that like 80 years of life is just good. I don't need to worry about living forever, or like this much money is fine. I don't need to have a personal Dyson sphere powering my like infinite life simulator, or whatever the effective altruism movement is sometimes thinking about. So I would emphasize that. And then I do think there's a second component that I won't go into, but is in my next academic book on wellbeing public policy, which is more about inequality. And I do kind of think that we need to think more about lifting the bottom rather than kind of having many people go out the top. That doesn't seem to make much sense to me. And I think that would improve well-being. And we can come at that in ways that don't go fully into all the kind of justice considerations and stuff, but are a little bit more agnostic in that regard. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. August, do you want to ask the question? Yeah.
Yes, I can do that. So thanks for a lovely talk, Mark. And my question is coming to concrete actions in the way that I love everything you say about the society that promotes virtues, shared values, love, and everything there. And the question is, I mean, we talk a lot about public policy and governments and such, and how much of this change can be led by government, how much can be led by, and how much is led by cultures or changing cultures. And if it is cultures, how do we change cultures? So maybe a $1 million question, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts and reflections on that question.
Yeah, thanks. So as I said, I do have a book coming out on that probably early 2027, so there'll be much more detail there. I guess I would emphasize more the cultural piece, or at least I think that at the moment we disproportionately talk about policy and government action without talking enough about cultural change. And that might be because we as academics have more access to kind of policy levers. As you say, changing culture is not something that we as individuals have much control over. We are not pop stars. We are not public intellectuals. At the same time, I think that's kind of where a lot of our contribution could come in. So I think we do need to stimulate these national conversations, and we need to do those in ways that are more deliberative and build momentum. The way political movements build momentum by a few people first getting together and then gradually attracting more people to them. And I think we as wellbeing scholars can play that kind of role by getting research grants to do this kind of deliberative work, or joining community organizations that already exist and facilitating this kind of research work there, or writing more popular commentaries, writing more popular books. That's what I tried to do with this book, that kind of stuff. So I do think it's very cultural, but then if the major institutions of the state are really captured, as they seem to be in the US in particular in some ways, so Gillens and Page have all this work talking about how Congress generally passes laws that benefit the top 10%, then they will really stymie a lot of the potential for that cultural change to translate into institutional change. So I think it's all kind of tied in together. In terms of the policy work, my main argument is that we need to think less about discrete policies and more about systems of governance. So neoliberalism manifests in the way states work in this method of public governance called new public management. And new public management is played out. We need something new. One of the biggest tropes of new public management is a fixation with metrics and trying to measure things that are unmeasurable. And I think well-being is a bit like that. I know that's a bit controversial in this community, but I think we need to focus more on sociological approaches, political approaches to policy development and policy change, which is why I'm so kind of co-production pilled at the moment and trying to think about how we can do more participatory governance. Thanks.
Paulo, are you here? I am not sure that I understood correctly your question. I don't know if you want to ask directly to Mark. Paulo? Well, I think that he was talking, he wrote talking about virtues, values. I have ever think about alienation and work with the other word, education. I don't know, is that the way Paulo is asking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. Yeah, I do think about alienation a lot. And I think this kind of comes back to the postmodern stuff. I think we are very alienated from each other right now, partially by the collapse of all our previous ways of being organized, like the shared cultural values that we had, and partially by late stage capitalism. So late stage capitalism as a culture encourages us to be individualistic, to focus on our distinctions from other people, to focus on getting ahead in a rat race. All of these things alienate us from each other, and we need to get back to each other, but we have to do that in a liberal way. So not by saying that this is the culture that we're all going to subscribe to, and if you don't subscribe to this culture, then I'll do bad things to you. What we need to instead is find the places where we can connect. And I think subreddits and places like this kind of show the way, that there are possibilities for us to just connect with people on shared interests, but also just through neighborliness, through familiarity with each other, the things that Kristen was talking about, that when you go home to your family, you just talk about like, what are the kids doing? This kind of stuff. We can build on those kind of relationships, and we have to kind of embrace that mundaneness and re-sacralize it, I think. At the moment, we're always talking about like the new car or the new promotion. These are the things that are sacred to us. What we need to get back to is the sacredness of our immediate connections and our communities and our neighborhoods and these kind of things, and then we will overcome alienation. And I think education can help with that, but we have to make sure it's not indoctrination.
I think that this is a fantastic way to finish this webinar. And thank you everyone for participating in Mark's webinar. Please be sure to participate in all of the ISQOLS webinar sessions, and also to follow us in social media, also in our new channel in Instagram. And we will be posting this recording and all the other session recordings on our ISQOLS platform soon. Thank you, Mark. It was great. It was very inspiring. I will have to continue chatting. And also thank to all our participants that they have joined from all places in the world. And see you hopefully in one of the next 3 ISQOLS conferences, the regional conference in Buenos Aires, our virtual winter conference in January, or also our annual conference in Kentucky in the US in August. So thank you, Mark, again. It was great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Jill. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Yes. See you all soon.